So this week, we will talk about something we hinted at last week, but it has finally been approved, the Six Flags and Cedar Fair merger. This has been a story we talked about when it was first announced, and then we hinted at it last week with the IP integration that Six Flags is doing. And now I am here to tell you that the DOJ has approved the merger, and we've gotten a few more details, but not many, about how it's all going to operate. But as these things are, as we've talked about, where it's going to be a little bit of news now, and then you're going to see really the changes over the next several years as they reorganize everything. And I think a lot of changes we're not going to see externally, but we'll start off with what the current CEO of the Cedar Fair Parks has, Richard Zimmerman, about what he gave in the statements that he gave. He said that with an anticipated pro forma enterprise value of approximately $8 billion, the combined company is well positioned to drive future growth. Our enhanced financial flexibility will enable us to invest in new rides, attractions, food and beverage options, and state-of-the-art consumer technologies, ensuring continuous improvement and innovation, and that each park visit is more exciting and memorable than the last. Our merger establishes a new Six Flags Entertainment Corporation with a highly diversified footprint and robust operating model, enhancing park offerings and performance through the complementary portfolio of attractive assets and intellectual property from each Cedar Fair and former Six Flags. Following the merger, the combined company operates 27 amusement parks and 15 water parks across US, Canada, and Mexico. And Six Flags has stated that all 42 parks will retain their previous branding with no changes to park names currently, asterisk there, being planned or contemplated. When asked about season passes, they did say that there's no plan to make an all access, as in like a 42 park pass, is not in the works for 2024, but it might be a possibility in the future. And most of the executive team will be comprised of current Cedar Fair leaders, and the company's headquarters will be relocated to the Cedar Fair's current HQ in Charlotte, North Carolina, as opposed to the Texas kind of base that Six Flags was previously. So, yeah, it is a really interesting movement around. To me, the things that stand out the most, fortunately or unfortunately, are that no real mention of live entertainment was really brought to the forefront. It's clear that they were focusing on the rides, which makes sense because Cedar Fair has been, I think Six Flags, both of those parks have been really toting the thrill capital of the whatever. So I think it's clear they have an eye towards the rides, and they have an eye towards technology, which we have talked about in many stories over the years, like about the walk in and walk out kiosks and the scanning that some of them are piloting. So you could see where they could really integrate all the parks together and make a much more guest comfort level experience at these parks, if they can get the staffing to figure that out, and if they can get the line jumping and all those kind of things under control, which we've also talked about. So there's a lot of challenges, I think, to making it what they say here about making it a good experience, because so many of them have just wildly different experiences depending on where you are. And I think that's going to be a big problem. I also think the other big flag is the intellectual property. I mean, we know that Cedar Fair and Six Flags have different IPs. And so it seems like they're hinting here that there might be the ability to move those between the whole portfolio, so that you're going to start to see, like a DC thing at Knott's or something, where they can able to move stuff around. So, Scott, what do you think?
Well, I think there's a couple things that I think are very interesting about this. Number one, because you and I both have friends who work for both of these companies, now the single company, but former separate companies. And based on what I have seen them post publicly, so I'm not sharing any, I'm not betraying any internal trust. This is all stuff that has been shared publicly. Everyone seems to be very enthusiastic about the merger. And people who have come from both sides, both from the former Six Flags side and the former Cedar Fair side. I will say that both parks have been struggling. So to bring them together, they're looking at it as here's another potential savior of the industry, or not the industry, but of this corporation or these corporations. I think it's interesting too because with the number of parks, I mean, obviously they now have pretty much just as far as numbers of parks, if we're just talking numbers, they're, if not the top in the U.S., they're very close to it. I mean, they have significantly more parks than Disney or Universal have, and significantly more parks than the former SeaWorld Parks and Entertainment has. So their business model is, I think, going to be interesting. I'm curious to see. It should be, in my opinion, they should focus on the non-tourist. They should focus on the local. I would think that part of the reason that they don't want to do a grand and glorious season pass for everybody is because it's not their business model, at least not at the moment. And I would think that they would want to remain as the purveyor of everyone's quote unquote hometown theme park. Because, I grew up with well, it was Paramount when I first started, but what eventually became Six Flags Great America in Gurnee. And I would have a season pass every year and I would go multiple times. And that was what we did in the summer. It was a seasonal park. That's what we did. So it seems to me that would be, instead of making it an ultimate destination because they are so spread out. Obviously with Disney, they want to get you to Florida or California because that way every dime you spend goes back to them. Yeah. But if Six Flags is planning to follow this business model, which it doesn't seem as though they are, I don't think that's a wise choice because, if you've got these now Six Flags parks all over the country, your focus is not let's bring people across the country. Your focus is let's have Six Flags Great America own the Chicagoland market. Let's have and so it's interesting because when you have that mindset, when you have that business model of we're going to own the local market, but you are national or international, really, you're international and you have the clout and the opportunity to get some of those things that you wouldn't be able to have as a small park, but you can focus them into a small park mentality. That could be a very, very interesting and profitable business model. So let's see how that shakes out. Because again, I would not expect to see here in Florida, for example, I would not expect to see a marketing campaign that says "Come to Gurnee, Illinois for Six Flags Great America." I just don't see that happening, and nor do I think it should. So I think it's going to be the small town park with the big town clout. And I think that could be a very interesting business model for them. We'll see how that works.
I really like the idea of pointing out that this is a business model we really maybe have not seen before in the industry, because like you said, the scale of this is so different that I think us maybe trying to apply the Disney Universal lens is flawed because we have not seen this model before, Right. I mean, so like we've talked a lot about how initially it was just clicks of the turnstile and then it became upsells for Disney and, expanding your inventory with night events and all that. We don't really know what this business model is because they have so many locations.
Right.
So I think the question is, like you were saying, the question is, what do they need to own the local market? Mm-hmm. So do they need?
And if they've got the power and the clout to get the IPs that the local parks that are not underneath the Six Flags umbrella, and to be completely honest, this is not new. Six Flags tried to do this several years ago. Yeah. Six Flags went on a huge expansion program. Unfortunately, their pockets weren't deep enough, and they didn't have. I'm speculating here. For some reason, I'm assuming they didn't have the cash turnaround. They bought a ton of parks and then ended up selling them off because they didn't have the money to renovate them and bring them up to a consistent level across the country. Now with the two parks coming together, they didn't have to nobody had to buy parks. They just merged and all of a sudden, in essence, doubled their power within the industry. And so I'm curious. It may work, it may not. But as you say, we cannot look at this through a Disney lens. We cannot look at this through a Universal lens because that's clearly not the situation they're in. Just imagine if there were 27 Disney parks around the country, you wouldn't have the push to come to Walt Disney World. You wouldn't have the push to visit Disneyland and California Adventure. And I find it interesting, looking at the differences even between the two Disney models, because they are very different.
Yeah.
Disney California is much more like a local or regional park, even though it does have a strong pull from outside. It operates significantly more like a local park. Walt Disney World in Florida is a destination. Period. It is, the locals. Yes, they pander to locals, but they will cut back local benefits like that because that's not their bread and butter. So, like I said, I'm curious. I'm really curious to see how this new model works, or if this new model works. I'm kind of hoping it does because, we've had, because you also mentioned rides and not live entertainment. We've got Disney Universal focusing on very specific types of world building experiences. Six Flags has never been known for that. They will pick up IPs and apply them sort of kinda and create rides. They are the coaster parks.
Yeah.
Cedar Fair, same thing. They are the ride parks. So if they become that part of the market, if they carve out that part of the market that you don't have to travel for, that you can get your adrenaline junkie rush at any of these parks, it sounds like it could be successful to me. Then layer on top of that the IP, and if they're going down that route, then the IP will be layered on in the form of rides versus shows. But still, they could carve out their own little niche here and be pretty darn successful at it.
Yeah. I think earlier, I do think they could be successful. I think that, like we've been saying, what are they going to need to do to capture the local market? But I think earlier you talked about the concept of it being like a savior or not, or like this. And I think the money is I think that's also why he hinted at that. He hinted at them having the capital to to count it, almost like he knew people were going to remember, like you did, about like the previous. And he was like, okay, it's different this time, guys, because we're merging together and there's more money. So,
right. Well, they didn't have to buy the other parks.
Yes. Yep. They had a better financial position. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So they didn't have to deplete their cash resources to purchase the other parks first.
Yep.
Now they just have to take those resources and use them to either unify in their own unique way, because even they say we're not going to change the names, we're not going to change the branding of the individual parks. It's almost like, and this is a flawed analogy, so forgive me, but it's almost like franchising. There's a main corporate control that gives you the power, the clout, the financial benefit, the negotiating power on a very large level. But each park still is going to, from what they are claiming here, is going to maintain its unique individuality. And I think that's also an important part of this plan, or should be, because if they all become the same, then you're never going to get anybody to visit any of the other parks out of loyalty. So I think it is wise to maintain the diversity of the park brands. And even though their target, in my opinion, should not be the long distance traveler, but the day trippers.
Yes. Well, I actually really agree with that. I think that, again, we're postulating because, we haven't seen this model before, but I think both of us would agree that our hypothesis for this model is that they need to own the local market. And in order to do that, they need to be a little customizable, so you don't really want to change the name, you need the park to have enough leeway to incorporate local flavor, like allow a performance of the local bands and the local schools and, bring in some of the local performer. You need to be able to become the locals park, and you can't do that if it's, if it's too standardized. So keeping the names would track with that. But I also think, but back to the savior point or the challenges, money and all that aside, do not like whenever companies get larger like this, it's always a question of whether or not they can iron out all of the little things. Like, can you create an even with franchises, it's always a question, can you create at least a minimum standard experience across the line?
Mhm.
And I think it might be a little bit closer because, again, Cedar Fair and like, they've been operating for a while, so it's a little bit closer. But that's going to, in my mind, be the biggest challenge really is like, even down to the internal staffing, like how are making sure all the internal processes and even the stories we've covered, we see wildly different issues at the different parks, and maybe they'll be given, maybe it's possible to have enough local leeway.
And different parks, even within the two
The
separate
same market, yeah.
The two separate companies.
Yeah.
When you compare a guest experience at Knott's versus Carowinds, I'm not saying one is better, one is worse. I'm saying they're different. And so now you add on top of that all the former Six Flags properties that are now part of the new Six Flags. It's interesting. It's interesting to see. It's a good point, Philip. I'm curious to see if they are going to be able to establish and maintain a standard of excellence across the entire corporation.
Yep. I'm sure they're sitting in a room thinking that same thing.
Oh, my guess is they've been sitting in a room thinking that same thing for quite some time. And now that the merger has officially been announced, approved, stamped, a done deal, then it's like, boom, done.
Yep. The last piece to add on this story before we leave, because we got to admit on to our next stories, but the last piece to add is just that they have opened a Roblox metaverse experience, in the middle of all this. I think this news got buried a little bit because the merger definitely gets more headlines, and then this thing kind of just fell, I think, off a lot of news outlets' radar. But basically, they launched a experience on Roblox. So essentially, on Roblox, there's Six Flags areas, or there's Six Flags virtual coasters and mazes inspired by Fright Fest and games and all that. And basically, users can collect little coaster coins. And then what's interesting is they can collect them and they can redeem them at physical Six Flags parks. So this is another one of those things where I'm like, oh, I think when they mention those innovation, we're like, this is more what I think they're talking about. He's hinting at that. And I think the reason this got buried, because here's the thing, if Six Flags wanted it to everyone to talk about, they would. So I think it's more of like a testing. And I think it's interesting because this would be the market, right? Like the people, the gamers, the kids, the younger people that are playing these, if they can engage them again. So they have 42 parks, right? So much wider. So, and they're gamers everywhere, like in every city. So if you can get those kind of local gamers and they're playing their games and then they get some coins and you can incentivize them to go to their local park and exchange them for some stuff, that could be a real strategy. I mean, very interesting strategy.
It becomes an immersive, fully engaged marketing strategy.
Yep.
It's brilliant, and we've talked about that the gaming IPs are significantly more robust now than even the film and television IPs. So, I hate to say it, but it's sort of like, hey, I'm going to collect all my skee ball tickets and then I'm going to go redeem them and come home with a plastic piece of something or other. But it gives you it takes that concept and just builds it. I mean, when I was a kid, vacationing on the Jersey Shore, every night we'd go to the skee ball parlor and collect those tickets and collect those tickets and collect those tickets. And it's not because, we couldn't just go and buy whatever it was that we were going to get at the end of the vacation. It was because it became, we gamified the experience. Yeah. And that's exactly what this is doing. And it's gamification that will lead to an actual physical appearance in the park. Smart.
I was going to say, Scott, I think the word you're looking for is it was fun.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Yeah. And that's, anyway, so that's another story. Like we could, we'll be watching to see how that works out. And I also think it's so fitting that it's not a thing that too many people are talking about, because if you think about the echo chamber of media, they're generally older people, right? So like this is not for us. And so we didn't see it, right? Most of the outlets didn't see it because it's not for us, but we don't need to see it because we are not the target market anymore of this
and
new
once
company.
once it becomes too mainstream, the people who are engaged with this are no longer interested because they haven't found something cool.
Correct. Yeah. So we'll see a lot of potential here. Our next story, I think, is of equal maybe potential in terms of things that are really interesting, and that is that Hersheypark has announced their Halloween plans. So I really like what is going on. I think the Hersheypark team has always been excellent, and they have always really delivered on quality and really maintained that standard at their parks. But I think that is showing even more with their new Dark Nights event, which is only this is the third year. It's only 3 years old, right? So it's this will be the third season. So like we're going to the third season. So they announced the return of Dark Nights and Hersheypark Halloween. It's going to start on September 13th this year and go through November 3rd. So that is 25 nights, including Halloween night. So that's an expanded schedule. And this year there's going to be 5 haunted houses, including a new one that they've added called Estate of Evil. There's 3 scare zones, and one of them is new. Plus, you get access to the 50 attractions and dark coasters and the trick-or-treat trails and whatnot. The 8-weekend event will also feature exclusive culinary creations, and they have a tasting pass. Plus, they have a new Avenue of the Afterlife path with it, which is like a scare-free path as well that's integrated into the event. So the thing that always blows me away, I think people hear that and they just think, oh, it's a smaller version of Halloween Horror Nights, or it's like the locals version of whatever. Okay, except this is included for all pass holders. So if you are a pass holder, you just get access, to all of the Halloween festivities and everything. And then if you buy any one-day ticket, even, it includes like the day and all the way through the Halloween night. So the thing about this, which I think is so interesting, is they are adding a haunt. So now we have 5 haunts, but they're keeping it included for pass holders. So it's just value add for their current fans and locals. And of course, the tasting card, and of course they're trying to get people in to do the upsells and all that. But I mean, I don't know, Scott, you and I know how difficult it is to convince a board, oh, we're going to add a haunt. And so they're asking, so you're telling me we're adding entertainment? And you're like, yes. And how much are we charging for it? We're not. It's free. And they just stare at you, So,
well, what they're doing is they're running a Halloween event the way most parks run Christmas events.
Correct. That's exactly.
And that is the idea being, we're going to get an extra meal out of people, or we're going to get a second day out of people, even though it's not a second day of admission. It's a second day of potential merchandise. It's a second day of potential culinary. Christmas events pretty much throughout the theme park industry run this way. It is added value. I've often said that if you're going, it's very difficult in most cases to go from an added value to a separate ticket. That usually has a lot of pushback. So they seem to have a great deal of confidence that this is going to work for them. Which is great. And I have heard nothing but good things about this event, and I unfortunately have not been up there to see it. I think it's, again, is it the local version of Halloween Horror Nights? Well, no. Is California's version of Halloween Horror Nights Florida's version of Halloween Horror Nights? No, it's not. There are unique qualities to each, just like Busch Gardens Tampa and Busch Gardens Williamsburg and SeaWorld San Diego are all different Howl of Screams, even though they all have the same name. So I think we have to take it at face value and recognize that this is a great value add for people going to Hersheypark. And, I would even go so far as to say, if you are a haunt fan, and I know a lot of haunt fans who are kind of shying away from the larger parks just simply because they've gotten so crowded and so expensive, this might be a location, that you want to stop at, just to kind of check out. Maybe it does become a tourist destination.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, we have friends who just travel around the country, and go see haunts and such. So.
What I'm going to add to that is that it is an incredible event. Y'all just got to trust me because I think I know a little bit about haunts. So it is an incredible event, objectively speaking, and just guest feedback. I mean, it's Scott has many times talked about the best way to open it and consulted on new events, and I think they followed everything 100% according to the book. So it's done really well. What I think about this though as an overall trend is exactly what you mentioned for Christmas, which is I think potentially this could signal a little bit of a pendulum shift because we talk about theme parks being the whole culture's being pendulums and things going back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
To me, this might signal that shift to moving back towards having it be included in, and if you tie this back to our previous story, I could see, I'm just hypothesizing here, but I could see a world in which the new Six Flags branch rolls out, like a IP from Netflix at, for the 27 of their parks countrywide, and they say that Fright Fest is going to be included for pass holders, and they use that as a lever, to getting a lot more new passes and blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly you have an environment where it is being pushed back to the norm being that it's included, which also could create a lot more competition for the local haunted house, because I think for so long, local haunted houses have been competing against that concept of like, well, we're cheaper and we're better, than going to a theme park where you have to pay for everything and it's so expensive and there's lines and they conga line you. But if the equation switches to it being included, if you're a pass holder, and then you also get Christmas, that's just saying, may not happen. That's just kind of one of my thoughts, but that's kind of what I think when I see stories like this.
Well, and if you've ever taken a seminar from me or listened to this or listened to a Scott in the Dark or whatever, you will hear me say that seasonal activations are their primary goal should be to make a season pass worth more. Whether it provides you with early access or provides you with a discount for a separate ticketed event or just includes the event itself. That's the purpose of seasonal events, is to do two basic things: to elevate the value of a season pass and to encourage repeat visitation.
Yep.
It puts a fuse on your visit. Locally, people will say, yeah, I live here. I'll go to the park someday. And then all of a sudden you do a concert series that has somebody that you want to see, and it gives you a reason to go that weekend. Yep. So Halloween, Christmas, spring, summer, food, all of these events do exactly the same thing.
Yep. Okay. We're going to do a really quick story here because I don't think there's much to talk about other than it's a terrible idea. So SeaWorld Orlando has instated a no re-entry policy. What the heck? So they just really threw it up there last minute. The story was originally broke by Attractions Magazine. The editor actually, Matt, saw this and questioned a few of the ambassadors about it. And even the staff, according to his reporting, is unsure about, again, whether this even applies to season pass holders. Some of the staff says season pass holders even are not allowed back in after they come in once a day. So I don't know. It's just a no re-entry. You can't leave the park to go back for hotel breaks or lunch or anything in the car if you forgot something or whatever. One other thing I'll add, Theme Park Insider also picked up the story after Attractions Magazine, and they ran a poll asking if that was a deal killer for you. And of the over 3,200 people who replied for that, 65% said that yes, that was a deal killer.
Yeah, again, is it a deal killer? That I don't know. What I will say is I think it is, in my opinion, based on my experience in the industry, it is a very poor choice.
Yeah.
I understand why it is being done. I understand all the things that look really good on paper, but ultimately the guest experience is going to suffer. And that is dangerous. On paper, it looks great because it means we capture additional culinary revenue. That means we have less we have less security issues. We have less people going out to, it used to be that people would go out to their cars and drink or smoke pot and then come back in. That's part of the reason that Halloween events never allowed you to leave and come back. I mean, that's been common practice for Halloween across the board. There is no leaving. there is no reentry. So that's something that has been part of a Halloween event, just ongoing since Halloween events started in theme parks. But I think this is just a poor guest choice. To me, this is the same mistake that looks good on paper with like a Santa photo, where you can say you can't take photos on your own camera. Only we can take photos. And what that does is it pisses people off, so they just leave. They don't even look at the photo, even though it's far better than anything they could get on their camera. So it becomes detrimental overall. And I agree with you, Philip. I think this is a poor choice, and I'm hoping that SeaWorld Orlando recognizes this. But I do understand the logic behind it. The logic behind it on paper, and that is, it means that we're going to get more culinary revenue. And based on the time that I spent in Orlando not too long ago, the culinary could use some additional oomph there. So. Speaking of oomph, we're about to be oomphed off the air because we have hit our 30 minutes. And wow, that was the lamest transition I have ever done. Hashtag lame transition. Yeah. Anyway, that's all the time we have for this episode of Green Tag Theme Park in 30. We hope to see you all again here next week. On behalf of Philip Hernandez with Gantom Lighting and the Haunted Attraction Network and myself, Scott Swenson with Scott Swenson Creative Development, this is Green Tag Theme Park in 30, and we will see you and every single human being that you know next week.